First order of business, I want to pay my respects to Dr. Mason. We've known each other, as you said, for quite a number of years now. And I really also have the utmost respect for what he has done, his life's journey, how he got to where he got to, with challenges, I'm sure, too, like many of us have. But Dr. Mason is very, very inspiring as far as I'm concerned. Thank you. And Provost Callahan. We just met, Provost Callahan and I just met just today, just maybe an hour or so ago. And I'm really grateful for you to entertain this idea of discussing this the way that you're encouraging. It's really very, very nice advance in a sense. I'm going to discuss with you, is this on? Yes? I'm going to just, can you hear me okay if I walk away like this? Okay, I didn't know whether I had to be there or not. So I want to discuss with you, in a sense, how I learned this stuff, if you will, which has become very exciting. I started in a very unusual place as far as research is concerned. I'll share that with you, and then talk to you about some of the key things that we learned. In 1 hour, I'm trying to summarize essentially 60 years worth of experience. It was actually 60 years ago, this past August, that I started my research career. So I've been around for a little while. So here's my title. Why isn't nutrition a medical specialty? I don't know how many group people really thought about that. You folks are all in the medical system in one way or another. But that's always, nutritional science is sort of my main interest as far as the professional is concerned. And I've often wondered why is nutrition not better conceived? Why is it not better attended to, if you will? I'll share some things with you about the problem, because in order to understand a solution to something, we need to know what the problem is. So let me walk through just quickly some of the problematic concerns we have. Nutrition research, the professional nutrition research that we do in the laboratory, for example, the funding for that is almost non-existent relative to all the other research money that we spend in biomedical research. NIH, which funded almost all of my research, all of our research was public money, I should say. But in any case, NIH is made up of 28 different institutes and centers and programs. Of all those that are there, there's heart, there's cancer, there's this and there's that. There's not one called the Institute of Nutrition. If you stop to think about that, that is really downplaying the subject. The only institutes at NIH who do declare having provided some funding is heart, lung, cancer, and a couple of others, and it's more of the order of 2 or 3 or 5% or so of the total budget, so it's not much money. As you, I think, know quite well too, at large, for medical schools across the country, and in Europe, I should say, nutrition education is relatively missing. Yes, there's medical schools here and there that have some topics, and maybe as much as 15, 20, 25 lectures or so, but that's really kind of just on the surface. So nutrition education is frankly missing from medical schools. And among the medical specialties, as I just mentioned before, I don't know whether I have the right list or not, but this list is from the Medicare program. There's 63 medical specialties. And they add another 13 at the end to say sort of some other specialties. I don't know what that means. But in any case, let's say there's 76 medical specialties. My question is, why is nutrition a medical specialty? I find that really appalling, considering the fact that what we now know nutrition can do. One final issue, as far as problems are concerned, one that I'm sure you're all familiar with, and that is that those who wish to practice this kind of art, if you will, with their patients or in their programs, reimbursement is a big deal. We don't get reimbursed. So you folks, in the professions, we all know that. The reimbursement needs to be put in order. Now, come back to the question, well, what am I talking about when I say nutrition? First, we need a definition. You may be surprised to learn that even those of us in the nutritional science discipline over the years don't really have a consensus on what the definition really is. It's really quite appalling. I'm suggesting that it's very simple. It's simply the biological expression of food. People interchange the use of the word diet and nutrition sometimes. an appropriate diet. Diet, as you know, is an array of all the foods we tend to consume. Nutrition is the expression of those foods at the biological level as to what's really happening. But it's not just having a definition that we first need to do. The real issue as far as nutrition confusion is concerned has to do with function. Which foods are involved in providing this nutrition? And what kind of mechanism, what kind of activities do they really express in order to create health, if you will? And well, for this, at this point in time, as far as the information we now have is concerned, nutrition can prevent, and I emphasize the word treat. That's pretty shocking, I know, for perhaps a lot of clinical audiences especially, but nutrition can prevent and treat disease, I'm going to suggest, more effectively than all the pills and procedures combined. That's a big, broad mouthful. I know it's very challenging to think of it that way, but I'm really convinced. Because when you take people and put them in the program that I'm talking about, it's remarkable how their problems, their medical problems, can be resolved so quickly and so broadly. A little more in the background, sort of consideration. This is 2009. I should have a more up-to-date thing, but it makes the point that we can make still today. Namely, if we compare countries like us, like the United States, industrialized Western countries, if we compare their sort of the dynamics, the financial structure of our systems, we've got problems here in the States, even compared with our compatriot countries like us. Namely, healthcare expenditure trends as a percent of the GDP, as you can see there, since about 1960 or so, has been rapidly rising. That's not news to any of us, we all know that. But the interesting thing is, and I think this is generally known too, here in the United States, per capita healthcare costs exceed that of any of our sort of compatriots, if you will, compatriot countries. That's pretty shocking. Then at the same time, as far as life expectancy is concerned, among those same countries, we spend the most money per person or per capita, and we're actually getting almost the least return. Life expectancy is the lowest among those countries where we spend the most money. Not a very good business model. And of course, at the same time, just another statistic that helps us understand some things, we use more prescription drugs per person here than any of the other countries. I think that pretty well defines, the size of the problem, the nature of the problem. We're spending a lot of money, not getting well, or not keeping ourselves well, and maybe we're using the wrong kind of products to get us to where we should be. So I'm talking about that. A whole food, plant-based diet. I came from a dairy farm where we were advocating consumption of milk, meat, and dairy. This is where I grew up, and especially the consumption of animal protein. And I learned along the way I had to take a U-turn. And this is the model where we're at the present time. By the way, it's a high-carb diet. Just for those folks out there who talk about low-carb diets, I'm talking about a high-carb diet. Exactly the opposite. Because I'm talking about all the carbohydrates in food that are only produced in plant-based foods. Okay, so another sort of picture, if you will, of the size of the problem. This is a bar chart showing the effect of, let's say, different treatments on heart disease mortality. And so we've got a comparison here. On the left, let's say untreated people. They have a certain rate of mortality, if you will, just as a standard for purpose of illustration here. Then we also know that most people, when they get into heart difficulties, end up getting stents. Lots of stents in some cases. That's one of the main things that people tend to want to do. We also tend to assume, or cardiology friends tend to assume, that we need to go on statins at one point, and that's more or less a lifetime prescription for many folks. So most people who come in with a heart problem, stents and statins. Stents and statins. I think the estimate for the number of people who choose that course of action is very, very high proportion. On the other hand, according to these data here that were put together by this fellow John Tanner and published, showing there's some hint that eating plants is maybe better. Vegetarians, for example, for which he had some information. Their reduction in mortality is 31%. By the way, stents are down 3% as far as mortality is concerned, according to the best figures. Statin is down about 9%. So they have some effect, I guess we can say that, in terms of reducing mortality. But the people, the folks on vegetarian diets, down 31%. There's something here that's kind of hinting what we might think about. But that's not good enough. 90% of vegetarians, and I don't use that word really, 90% of vegetarians are still using dairy. And a lot of eggs, and oftentimes fish. They're not there. They're not where I'm talking about. So vegetarians have some advantage, but not the kind of advantage we're talking about. I'm talking about this whole food plant-based diet thing on the right. Now, I'm jumping ahead myself here a little bit for those figures. It's based on my friend, Dr. Colin Campbell, Dr. Ornish, but especially Dr. Estleton, as to the science of the reduction of the mortality, essentially, as to what he has observed. Namely, he finds you can reduce mortality by more than 99% in this latest study. It's huge. It's really huge. It's just quite remarkable. This on the left, stents is that I call reductionist science. And this is a big term for me, as I begin to understand this thing. Reductionist science, or reductionist medicine, if you will, is that concept where we tend to focus on using one thing to treat something, to achieve a specific result. But oftentimes, unfortunately, when we look at results, we want to talk about a vast, array of biological mechanisms. So reduction is to take one thing to treat a very complex system. Not a very good idea, but that's science. That's basically medicine. That's reductionism. That's what stents is. So it reflects, in a sense, that kind of philosophy. Over here, I call this holism, where we're talking about whole foods. We got to shift our thinking. Not talking about individual chemicals, whether they be nutrients or whether they be drugs or procedures, but rather we should be talking about whole foods. It's sort of back to nature kind of phenomenon. Now, just to add some numbers to this, which I find pretty striking. These numbers are estimates. I check them out with my friends who know better, but it's approximately correct, I would suggest. Let's say if we assume, we're trying to figure out cost here. Let's say we assume that the person who gets in the stent business, the patient gets in the stent business, let's say they have a stent once every 2 years. I have friends, in fact, I was just with someone just recently who had 10 stents in a matter of 2 years, let alone one stent every 2 years. So I think I'm being very conservative here as far as that procedure is concerned. So running about, everyone's running 18,000 a year, sort of averages out over a period of time. Statins, you can add some more. It's fair to say, and this is a conservative estimate, somebody's having to pay, maybe the patient, but somebody's having to pay, I'm going to say in excess of, on average, $20,000 a year to take that procedure that we commonly use, stents and statins, to try to achieve health. That's a lot of money. In contrast, over here on the right-hand side, and this again is based on some observations, especially from my friend Dr. Estleton and some others, that just a 5-hour session with that guy, 5-hour session, sort of really learning information. These are 5-hour session for heart disease patients, just sort of spending some time with him. Let's say a person like that does it once, and that's what he did. Maybe he goes back and 5 years later does it again. I'm just putting some numbers together to get some estimates. It turns out that with far better results, much lower mortality, much lower morbidity, there's no comparison. How would you like to spend $150 a year and get results that far superior than spending something more than $20,000 a year and getting much less return, more mortality, more morbidity especially? That's Dr. Estleton. How many have read his book, How to Reverse Heart Disease? Okay. Cleveland Clinic, we just, in fact, were with him just 2 days ago. He did this study back and published in 1995. He's published it again. This was a limited study in terms of numbers of patients, just 18. But he found out he put 18 patients on his diet. And we didn't know each other at the time, Dr. Estleton and I. He had his own motivations. I want to emphasize that point. He didn't come from reading the book, but he had his own motivation to do what he did. And so we got these remarkable results that were featured to some extent and forced overnight in that film. But there was some criticism of Dr. Estenson's little study in the sense that it wasn't very many people. So he said, okay, I'm going to take on some new patients, and he's been taking them and accumulating, and he attends to them as a physician along with his wife, who shows him what to do. And so you may have seen this, it's published 2014. I don't want to go through the first part of it, you can have a look, but that's the reference. In any case, what he did, he took patients and set them down for 5 hours. Showed them how to cook, told them something about the basic mechanisms by which heart disease occurs and what they could do. So he did. Then he went back after he had accumulated something like 196 patients, between, on an average, 3.5 years later, and he asked them, how are you doing? You still doing this? It turns out 89% of people, yes, we're still doing it. So then he had a chance to ask them, well, how's it been? He was able to determine how many recurrences he may have had among the people who listened. 89% of the people listened to Dr. Estes. Now, admittedly, they're fairly vulnerable people, they're inclined, they're motivated, there's a problem, but 89% is pretty good. Just for 1 5-hour session, let me tell you, that's really good. And so he gets 89% compliance. Those people who listen to him, the vast majority, only one person had a recurrence. One person over the next, say over the next 3.5 years or so. Those who did not listen, 67% did, just to give some context. So it's another way to sort of, I think, shape the argument, or suggest the kind of data we're talking about. He's using a whole food, plant-based diet, very simply, and getting remarkable results. How can, I mean, we don't need a statistician to tell us whether or not that's significant. It really does work pretty well. So, come back to my story. I want to tell you really quickly some of the evidence that really convinced me to shift gears from my own personal past. I was in the Philippines at that time, as many of you know who read the book, working with my senior colleague, setting up centers around the Philippines, poor country, to help feed malnourished children. That's what we're doing. We went there to make sure they got enough protein and enough calories. Protein was my gig, in a sense, because my doctorate dissertation, in fact, was really on feeding high-protein diets to achieve good health. So it's quite a turnaround for me, but nonetheless, that's what we're doing. We want to make sure they got enough protein. But then I saw a few families along the way. Anecdotally, so it was. In fact, I learned about the golf course. It was really for real. But I heard that there were some young children from my medical colleagues that were getting liver cancer, an adult cancer. I mean, children, forget it. But they told me that's what they were seeing, getting liver cancer at a young age. And then with our other, like wearing my other hat in the area of nutrition, I kind of learned, I got the impression, that the few families consuming the most protein were having the children getting the cancer. I'm thinking to myself, this is crazy. More protein, more cancer, that didn't really make any sense to me, especially given my background. So then I saw this paper here that was published, Experimental Animal Studies from India at that time. These researchers, in 1968, when they published that information, these researchers took some animals, rats in this case, exposed them to a chemical that causes cancer, liver cancer, and then decided or hypothesized if they gave them more protein, they might do better. It might be less likely to get the cancer. So that they had a regular, sort of higher levels of protein, 20% of total calories, compared with 5%, 20% versus 5%. With the hypothesis, 20% animals are going to do better. They're not going to get the cancer. 100% of those got the cancer. The ones 5% did not. Again, a huge effect. And for me, in those days, being from the school that, was arguing that we needed more protein and so forth and so on, that was quite shocking. It was kind of an obscure report at the time, and I guess most people wouldn't have noticed it, but it was my background, sort of seeing children, seeing this. It's all the same. High protein, increase the protein, increase the cancer. Heresy of the first order, let me tell you, to even have that crazy thought in mind. So I came back home, organized with NIH, a grant that lasted for that particular project 27 years. I wanted to know, Can we replicate what they did? Number one. Because it was so unbelievable. Number two, I wanted to learn something about how does this work? If that's true, we didn't even know how it works, for crying out loud. So we spent lots of years, and I had lots of graduate students to help in this, did their doctoral dissertations on this. We looked for the mechanism. As we traditionally do, and I'm sure you all appreciate this, we look for the mechanism that accounted for this effect. So we did. So let me show you just one little snapshot real quick. Because for me, this became really convincing, even though it was an experimental animals. It was so striking. So here's a study for, let's say, 12 weeks after, let's say, animals get a mutation that gives rise to liver cancer. The first thing all these animals were, they're exposed to an agent that causes mutations that starts cancer. So this is the starting point right here. And then they're fed either 5% or 20% diets. You can see the 5% animals, even though they got this carcinogen, it was a very potent carcinogen, they didn't get cancer. Just like the antibodies did. In contrast, the animals given 5% is going quite well, as you can see. Again, a huge difference. But this time I'm saying to myself at least, wait a minute, this is really shaping up as something pretty striking that we never anticipated seeing. More protein, more cancer. So then we did something, did many different things, but one of the illustrations that really came back to us that became rather convincing, we should ask ourselves, what happens if we just change the diet from, let's say, 5%, 20% back and forth a little bit? What happens in a case like that? You can see 20% first 3 weeks. Incidentally, these are what we call pre-neoplastic cancers, not quite fully cancer, but nonetheless, they're on the way to causing cancer. So we get 20%, you get that, shift them to a 5% diet, turn cancer off, back on again, and off. I have to tell you, that's really striking. The whole idea, we could turn on cancer on and off so easily, simply by nutritional means. If that was heresy before, talking about just protein-related cancer, this really is heresy squared in the sense that we could somehow turn cancer on and off with that kind of meaning. So then we got involved and did lots of studies, as I said, and over the years, I'll just show you one jumping way ahead. What happened when we, let's say, not just looking at early cancer, but what happened if we just did it for the whole lifetime of the animals? Getting 5% or 20% or shifting it. Here's the results we got. 5% animals, 20% animals, after their lifetime, their normal lifetime, the 20% animals, they got a huge, all of them got cancer. Cancer index was huge. The animals given 5%, none. And here's what was really kind of interesting too. All the animals given low protein diets, even though they've been exposed to a potent carcinogen, all living, thrifty, energetic, sleek hair coats, jumping around. No cancer. In contrast, 20% animals are normal. That's a routine level of protein consumption. So that, again, what we had seen before, what ended work was the same. The effect was so striking that I finally had to say to myself, wait a minute, this is so striking. We started changing our diet, to say the least. You know, that was back in the late 70s, early 80s. Took us about 10 years to get the whole way. But in any case, it kind of suggested we should maybe take this seriously. But I also became interested in something else, as I said before. What's the mechanism for this? So now let me tell you just a little bit about mechanisms. In cancer, we think of cancer sort of traversing over a period of a lifetime, maybe, or at least many years, through 3 stages. First, cancer, the cells are initiated. That's when the cells are suffering a mutation, if you will. And then these cells start dividing. If the body doesn't correct things, it starts dividing over a period of time. The new cancer cells start dividing. Pretty soon you've got something there you can see, and eventually you get to a point, that's promotion, you get to the point where we diagnose it. It causes some difficulty. 3 stages. That's an arbitrary kind of thing, but it's a way to think about it. So I look for the mechanisms at these different stages to see how is this high protein thing working so dramatically. So we look for the first thing. what effect it had on increasing the carcinogen and getting into the cell. The carcinogen is the thing that starts the cancer. We have found a high-protein diet increases the rate at which the carcinogen comes into the cell. Then we ask something else. When carcinogens come into cells, they get metabolized by an enzyme called mixed function oxidase, MFO. They get metabolized to a product that's chemically very, very reactive. It's an epoxide. That's the way things work. So the enzyme is critical. More carcinogen comes into the cell because of high protein, and the enzyme becomes more active because of high protein. Becomes more active in two ways. First, more protein is synthesized, suddenly, just like that. Secondly, that enzyme, the characteristics of the enzyme, the shape, the conformation of the enzyme, if you will, is actually altered in a way in which just intrinsically it became more active. So we get three mechanisms here already. The high protein does increase the amount comes in. Secondly, it's increasing the enzyme to activate it. Which one of those is the key reaction? I don't know. We could say either one. The third thing, it changed the structure of the enzyme. Increased it still more. Now we get three reactions. Then we also measured how much of that reactive metabolite comes and binds to the gene. Because that's how you convert a normal cell to a cancer cell. Specifically, the chemical binds the DNA. So we had a look there. The high protein diet increased rather dramatically how much of the carcinogen actually binds to the DNA to cause the mutation. Now, our bodies, by the way, have this fantastic ability for all of us here. We have these reactions, for the most part, going on in our bodies all our lives. But the good news is that we have a body, when we're doing it right, that the body repairs that so-called DNA carcinogen atom. That chemical comes in, keeps zapping away, binding the DNA, but we have what is called DNA repair. And that works really well for most of us, for most of the cells. What did high protein diet do? It increased the first three to cause more cancer. And then this defense mechanism we have to keep that under control, the high protein diet comes and saps that, says out of here. So it reduces our ability to be able to essentially cause cancer, what the result is. So we looked at the second stage, more of the same. After the mutation, the cell is mutated, for those of you in science in this area, after the cell is mutated, now it can grow as a little infant cancer cell. And the body again sees that as a cancer cell. But the immune system comes into play in many different ways, but one way it does, it corrects that. It produces some cells that can come and zap that cancer cells for obvious reasons. Those cells from the immune system that can do that, kill the cancer cells, are called natural killer cells. So we measured the effect of protein on that. Lo and behold, high protein diet reduced the ability of the natural killer cells to operate. It impacted our immune system, in a sense. Now we've got 5 mechanisms. So we've got some more. I want to go into all the details of that. It increased the rate at which cells divide through production of a hormone. It did things like it caused more formation of more so-called oxygen radicals. That's the nasty metabolites that cause aging and increased cancer and stuff like that. Finally, we had 10 reactions as I look back. And I was looking for the reaction. Which one? There's something dawned on me. That nutrients don't act that way, even though we think they do. This nutrient, in this case, was actually causing just a whole tsunami of mechanisms, many more than what we looked at, I'm sure. All operating together, no exceptions. If that isn't believable, in terms of the effect of high protein diets to actually increase cancer risk, then I say nothing is believable. 10 reactions there, it upregulated 8 of them, decreased cancer, it downregulated 2 that are normally there to keep things under control. So just figure out the odds of that. 10 out of 10. 2 up, the other 8 down. I mean, 8 up, 2 down. So, as I say, this is the, kind of the heart of what we did, but there are lots of bigger questions than even that. I'm convinced that in experimental animal conditions, the high protein diet turns on cancer, period, at least that kind of cancer. There's not even point much further discussion. Along the way, though, I was using these studies, being well aware that we use experimental animals, what does this have to do with human nutrition, if you will? It was an opportunity for us to learn some principles of nutrition that actually were not in the textbooks. I'm teaching nutrition, upper class nutritional biochemistry, stuff like that. I know it's in textbooks. But for some reason, in the nutritional community, none of the stuff I'm talking about could be found. So, you know, that happens every once in a while when people get to the point they don't like to hear what I say. No, I'm teaching. So, well, yeah, turn on, turn off, that's right. Got to get this right here. What's going on? Are we straight? Okay. Sorry, keep going. So anyhow, here's a principle. Nutrition, and we work with fat and pancreatic cancer. We use protein and liver cancer. We use, you know, antioxidants and mammary cancer. We did this. It became a general principle. Cancer can be controlled by nutritional means. Very exciting idea. Extraordinarily exciting. That's something that, this is a fundamental sort of biology, if you will. It applies to us. It's not just a rat thing. This is for real. Cancer development is reversible. Think about that. I'm right now involved, in fact, in trying to organize some thoughts to do the ultimate experiment. Nutritional means. Nutrition controls genes. There's another way I didn't put there, I forgot to stick it there. It has to do with the fact that instead of one nutrient causing this, it operates on multiple mechanisms. That's an exciting concept. The single mechanism idea is the foundation of the drug industry, I must tell you. The multiple effect is the effect in nature of nutrition. All of a sudden we see this huge distinction between nutrition on one hand and pharmacotherapy on the other. Worlds apart. So the opportunities that can accrue because of that are... Did you want to see? No? Oh, just listening? Okay. So anyhow, then the question is, what is this protein we're using all this time? I mean, it was the only protein that those of us in research sort of used. And I had to pay some attention to it. The protein we were using is the main protein in cow's milk. So being raised on a dairy farm, I must tell you, the main protein in cow's milk turning on cancer, that doesn't sound very good to me. In fact, it's very potent. So they say, okay, let's look at a couple of other plant proteins. Soy protein and wheat protein. These are quite lengthy experiments, by the way. Soy protein and wheat protein, even when fed at the higher levels, the 20% level, they can turn on cancer. So here's a new idea. Animal proteins aren't so good, maybe. They said, well, it suggests that plant proteins seem like they could be a lot better in that sense. That we went on later, and other research and stuff like that is a profound, I should say, a profound observation. Plant proteins and animal proteins are different. Animal proteins cause mischief. Plant proteins don't. We need protein. So in that context, then, okay, say a little later on, I was interested, what can we tell the public about this? How much protein should we consume to get this effect? Well, it turns out that we did an experiment. I didn't show you the real experiment results, but we did an experiment where we found basically that if you feed protein at, let's say, 4, 6, 8, up to 10% of total calories or so, even in a situation where there's a carcinogen there and cancer can go, you feed up to about 10% protein, no cancer. What's that tell us? That tells us that protein is good stuff. We absolutely need protein. Protein is a central nutrient, up to a point. That's what it says. Protein is good up to a point. What is that point? Well, it turns out at that point, okay, I'll skip that for the moment. The minimum amount of protein we need, we've known this for close to 80 or 90 years in science. The minimum amount of protein we need is around 4, 5, 6% of calories. Pretty low. But when that research is done in the laboratory, researchers like to be sure when they tell the public, ought to be a little more than that, so they add a couple of standard deviations to it. That brings us up to the recommended dietary allowance, the RDA you may be familiar with. So the RDA, as you see, sometimes you've heard about, I'm sure, that's the optimum level of protein. I think you would agree on this chart here. When we're at that level, we're meeting all of our needs. That's what it really is. And mind you, I'm talking about, the x-axis, disease risk in general. Generally applies to heart disease, diabetes, cancer, whatever. So up to about, let's say, 10% protein. We get all the protein we need, and it's absolutely essential that we get the protein. There's no question about that. But our average consumption of protein is around 17, 18%. All because most of us are consuming, we're acting like carnivores. We're dumping in a lot of animal food to get the protein. We forgot, historically, that plants have all the protein we need. In fact, plants have the ideal level of protein. And it's not true, as we've long thought, a lot of people think, it's not true that protein is only from meat. It's only animal-based. Protein comes from plants. So we've made that mistake for many, many decades or centuries, or a couple of centuries actually. So now let me show you what kind of inferences we can draw from this representation here. Plants can provide all the plant-based, all the protein we need, we know that, okay? Animal, in our heads, subconsciously, we tend to believe, I gotta get all the protein I get. You've heard the story. Where do you get my protein from? Everybody wants to have more protein. What that means is eat animal foods, which, as I should have said, is not necessary. But in any case, I'm just doing a schematic here. When we add animal food into animal protein, maybe see, we got up already 20%. Some people do that high. Also, all because they're adding animal food. But here's the thing we tend to forget. Okay, we start over again. Let's say we done, subconsciously we want to get around 16, 17%. So we add some protein in there. What that does, as we add that, there's a sort of zero-sum game as far as calorie intake is concerned. As we add the extra protein, we push aside the foods we should be eating. That's what we're doing. That's a big deal. So all of a sudden now we can think about this protein effect, if you will. Two ways. One way you can think about it, it's direct effects because of the mechanism I just described to you. The other way we can think about it too is all the good stuff, all the effects of the good stuff that have been pushed aside. That's a big effect. We need protein, yes, but now it's a question of how much do we need? I say the RDA is plenty. Actually, by the way, animal plants, if you just eat animal food, if you eat whole plant-based foods, you can't get up, by the way, to 50, 60, 70, maybe even almost as high as 20% protein. It doesn't make a difference. One is in the form of whole food. Eat lots of beans and leafy greens and so forth, and so on, you're going to get more protein, okay? When you do it as whole food, the body has the other stuff that comes along with it. They keep that otherwise nasty protein under control. Everything's just fine. And so the production of more free radicals and stuff like that are kept under control because they're consuming antioxidants and so forth. So that begs a question. Animal plants, here, I'll just show you quickly, I'm running out of time. Here's the composition of plant and animal food. Plants have mostly antioxidants, complex carbohydrates, and vitamins. They're basically made plants. It's a sum in animals, especially the antioxidants and something like that. It's because the animal was eaten at the time it was killed. So plants have this stuff here. This is the business end. This is the really good stuff. Plants also have enough fat and protein. Both are necessary. Plant-based diet, perfect, really, nutritionally ideal. Animals, none of these things do a good thing. That's not good. And so now we're talking not just about protein, we're talking about all the nutrients working together, if you will. Whoops. Need to do that, sorry. Processed foods, you know what I'm talking about. The convenience foods, donuts, stuff like that, cookies and cakes. in that particular case, we're not eating animal protein, maybe. You know, they say, oh, it's a plus. But in reality, these processed foods are usually high in sugar and fat. And oftentimes the wrong kind of sugar and fat. Fat, sugar is refined, fat is so processed foods, I'm saying, it's almost as bad as animal foods. It's also pushing aside the consumption of real foods. So there's, in a nutshell, the larger context. Okay, now we can ask some other questions. We attempted to do that, invited the China study, my youngest son, who's a physician, by the way. Now, we kind of got in the literature. I was particularly interested in this to see how broad is this effect. It's not just cancer, it's not just heart disease, not just this and that, all these diseases. When they looked in the literature, there's stuff published in the literature on all these diseases, some of them serious and none of them, let's call them nuisance stuff. They all tend to be reversed, at least sustained in further development, like it's in the whole food plant-based diet. It's really amazing. It's broad. Surprisingly, it's rapid. You take people, put them on, you'll hear this, I think maybe from Dr. Greger, possibly my son Tamar. When you do this, you take a group of people and say, okay, now I'm going to give you this to eat. And tasty, of course, and all that. Just in a week's time, 2 weeks' time, you can see amazing changes. It's truly remarkable. So if it's sustained, now as I said before, I can talk, I think, legitimately about the fact that whole food plant that actually treats disease. Isn't that exciting? Do you know of any drugs and pills and procedures that can do that well? And as long as you keep doing it, that's the key. You can't use a diet as sort of a drug-like treatment for a week or two and get your problems behind you. You have to kind of get used to it and you adapt to it because their tastes are rather addictive in any case. Okay, there we have it. Future's not like that. We have now quite a number of studies. I was deeply immersed in this area of the industry, in a sense, not in the industry, but actually being asked to testify on these matters and in federal court when that whole industry was started. So I took some notice and interest in it. You know, when the nutrients are in the food, be they plant even, they work fine. When you take them out, single them out, you put them in a pill, nutrient supplement, they tend not to work. In fact, that's the general consensus. Nutrient supplements not work. I say nutrient supplement, take a nutrient supplement as a means of getting nutrition is wrong. That's pharmacology. That's out of my territory. So nutrient supplementation is not in the game as far as this is concerned. It's whole foods. Now, we'll give to you my sense of maybe a different way of looking at nutrition that I find really handy. Is the one that was written in whole. Anyway, it's this. Let's just look at something theoretically here a little bit. Let's say we take one nutrient. You're consuming a spoonful of food. You can actually determine, essentially, theoretically, you can determine how much nutrient is in that spoonful or that cupful, if you will. So you know how much you're consuming, X number of grams or whatever it is, milligrams. You know how much is there in theory. So what happens to it when it's consumed? Well, all nutrients come into the body and they start out and they get digested. And I'm considering in this case, digestion for me means the nutrients in our food are being dissolved and released in our intestine. That's digestion. It's kind of releasing it, making them available for absorption. Okay? They're absorbed across the intestinal wall, and then they're transported to the blood, maybe in active form, maybe in inactive form. They get distributed to different organs. And the nutrient finally gets inside the cells, and as I say, it really explodes in terms of the possibilities for metabolism. So there are many different ways. They go this way, that way, this. Okay, some story. Here's what happens. We have forgotten what nature is. Because the body, as these nutrients traverse our system from the mouthful we consume until it's expressed, the body is constantly adjusting how much goes from stage 1 to stage 2 or stage 7 to stage 8 and so forth. Always adjusting things. The adjustments can be quite large, maybe 10, 20, 30, 40% within a microsecond almost. Very dynamic system. So therefore, that being said, just eats the amount each stage. There's no way we can know how much of a food nutrient is available to functional site. It's a myth. It's a myth. So it raises some serious questions that we have been accustomed to asking or assuming. We assume this much of this goes this way and that way and so forth and so on. If we consume the right kind of food, the body is choosing in its infinite wisdom every nanosecond for every one of our cells. It's choosing how much to go to the next stage or whether to send it there or here. It's a body phenomenon. We've ignored it. We've let technology take over our brains. Our body will do all the work we need to do. And the default position of the body is to create health. Another idea. Fascinating. Give it the right stuff. If you've been giving yourself the wrong stuff, you get in trouble. Give it the right stuff. The body knows how to use it. I'll show you one image of this that I found really impressive. Think about a cell. The cell's a basic unit of biology. I think many of you would agree. It's very complex. It's very complicated. That's where I spent much of my early years teaching biochemistry and figuring out, all these different reactions with my students and stuff like that, getting caught up in the numbers and so forth. But that cell, every cell is like a universe. It's so complex. There's all kinds of stuff going on in there. Stars here, and moons there, and so forth. Everything doing its own thing. And different cells tend to do different things, whether it's sitting in the liver or the pancreas or the lung or whatever. These cells they all have the same template, the DNA template from which they are able to do their favorite thing. So all the cells are the same that way, mostly. And so the cells are choosing, the body's choosing every moment in time. What does this cell do? What does that one do? It's amazing. And they talk to each other. We have communication between cells. Can you imagine that dynamic? It really is fantastic. And then we have between 10 and 100 trillion cells in our body. I haven't met the guy who actually counted those, but that's what it said. We have somewhere between 10 and 100 trillion cells in our body. Every one is like a universe. Every single cell. We can't imagine that number. And just as beautiful in all the coordination of activities go on. It's just amazing. Some kind of intrinsic forces there sort of keeping things in order. Each cell is not visible, can even sit on head of a pen. I'm talking about tiny things. 10 to 100 trillion cells talking to each other within the cells, deciding on how to make things go. The DNA chain link, for example, is ridiculously long for something you can't see. That's just to illustrate something about complexity. Now I'm going to say, how did I get into this crazy position? I used to teach biochemistry, upper class biochemistry, just for biochemistry students. And in those days, many years ago, this was 45 years ago, gosh, I hate to say that, but 50 years ago. This is when biochemistry was coming into its own. I found this something really exciting. Talking to students about, going reaction here, taking this chemical here, you metabolize it, you get out some energy, and it goes to the next step and step. And so, we end up with these things called glycolysis and Krebs cycle. How many have heard of the Krebs cycle? Everybody stands for it. Heard of glycolysis, I'm sure, too. So, this was fun. This was really fun talking about these different reactions. Trying to keep up with the science of the day. Somebody had a new reaction, new different, whatever. And so, as a result, there was a company used to make these charts. We call them metabolic charts. We'd hang them on the walls of our laboratories. We'd compete. Who got the latest chart? Kind of staying up to date. See these charts, they grow any bigger, bigger. Mine just like the 60s and 70s. Finally, look like that. And that's only just a piece of our knowledge, pretty tiny. So all those reactions, you can't see them, they were potentially made so you can't see them. In any case, they're incidentally Krebs cycle. Okay, and so I guess there's a question here. Can any single reaction tell all with no unintended consequences? That's the basis of the drug industry, by the way. Somehow we want to, like a chemical, go in and zap this reaction, that one, depending on what we want to do. Targeted drug therapy, you may have heard of that. And we're soon going to get away with it and do the good things. And sometimes it does look good for a little while. But we get side effects. All drugs have side effects. And the reason they have side effects is because as they're going through this pathway, through this complexity, they're disturbing everything around them. It's not natural. They have side effects, period. It's just the way it works. So I have this word, holistic. In science, holistic science was considered to be, I don't know, it was evil in science. In science we never liked the word holism because that was something about faith-based, and the other was, hardwired, factual, and so forth. And so when I wrote the book Whole with my friend, I was looking for a new way of describing holism. I didn't particularly want to spell it with an H because it tended to convey a certain meaning I didn't intend. And so I was looking for a spelling that had the W in front of it. And the Oxford Dictionary and Webster Dictionary didn't have that word, so I put the W in front of it anyhow, and I hope the next dictionaries will take it seriously on this. I'm talking about holistic in the context of everything working together in a highly integrated fashion. We got multiple nutrients operating here, mechanisms, diseases, all that stuff comes to that. That's what it is. It's a highly interactive, integrated holistic without making particular religion. There's the book. That concept of holism, think of it, that's nature. And it's not just operating inside the cells. It's a great place to look at to see how it works, maybe. And the whole body is working together. We got hormones, we got neurological, we got nerve impulse, we got all kinds of stuff to say this part of the body is going to tell us something about this and this. It's all working together. But then it goes beyond our bodies. It goes to, I would suggest, it should go to our society so we can get along with each other a little bit better. But it goes beyond even that. It goes into, look at this. Excessive medical care costs. That's why, what's the need to do that? Excessive medical care costs are occurring because we're operating a reductionist model, which creates enormous confusion. One thing can make some money too, that we hear about that as well. We're in a system where it's a system of massive confusion. That's the way it's built. What else could it be if we're looking at every tiny little thing that comes along when it's part of a larger whole? So we got excessive Medicare care costs, we've got unnecessary violence that's occurring, and we're referring to any kind of sentient being, human, animal, whatever, environment, inappropriate research, policy. I worked for about 20 years on national policy development on various so-called expert committees, and so I've learned that what we learn in the laboratory isn't necessarily what politicians want to hear. Two different stories. Quite a lesson. Personal health compromised. This environmental degradation is a big deal. It's a new idea essentially on the scene. And Dr. Oppenheimer, I think, is here someplace, is going to tell you about that. Got a great story. The effect of the kind of food we consume on our environment is huge. We've got to live with that idea. We've got to understand it. We've got to start solving the problem. It could be the demise, not just of us, but of the planet as a whole. I've got a friend now who came up with this crazy book from 2,000 years ago, retiring doctor from Ireland, since gotten to know him. He took the China study, our book, the last 10 years of his practice. He started putting cancer patients. He said on the China study. He has 70 patients, the last 70 patients he had. He said the cancer went away. I can't accept that, but that's his impression. I think maybe they did do quite well. We want to organize something, look at that question more systematically. Because I think theoretically that we could use this diet to treat cancer patients. I believe. Don't take me too literally about that. I'm simply saying that's what the evidence shows. So here, I think we're discovering something from the past. These old conjurers back in Greek times, they knew something. Aristotle said the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. That's a pretty neat idea. Because that's what I'm talking about here too. Let food be thy medicine, medicine be thy food. Hippocrates. I find it kind of odd that we use Hippocrates' name. I think we're rediscovering what Hippocrates said, basically. I think it's kind of odd, though, but somehow we use Hippocrates' name to bless newly minted medical students. They take a Hippocratic oath, right? Many of you have taken that. Why do we use his name and not use his idea? Why do we forget that? Something to be said to that idea. Finally, we got an online course. Some people were here, came up, told me we're taking a course. We're kind of excited about it. It's a collaboration between a nonprofit that we have and also the arm of Cornell University that does the formatting of the course. So, any interest in that? Thank you very much.
I want to thank Dr. Campbell for a great, great lecture. For those of you who've heard him before, I'm sure you learned even some more today. And Dr. Campbell, I think for the benefit of our audience, many of them don't know you. And you were a professor at Cornell for how long?
Forgotten. I see, from 1965.
And during your academic career, how many peer-reviewed papers did you publish? Approximately.
With students, by the way.
With students, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know, it's at least 350.
350 peer-reviewed papers. So we've been really fortunate to have someone like this to be here today to share this with us. We're going to try and stay on schedule, but I have to at least allow a couple of questions. Is Dr. Greger here? Oh, there he is. Is that all right, Mike? Okay. Just to come now, a question, not a soliloquy. Don't come up and try and ask, have a soliloquy, because I'm going to cut you off. So come up, you can add, do you have a question? A question. Yes.
Hi, Dr. Campbell, thank you. My question is, what research has been done on Hashimoto's and plant-based lifestyle?
What was the first on what?
Hashimoto's. What research has been done on Hashimoto's? You want to explain? We got to talk about what Hashimoto's is.
Right, the thyroid problem, basically.
Thyroid problem, right.
Yeah, so I'm obviously as much of an amateur than you. You probably know more than I do, but I look for a little bit for some of that evidence, and it suggests there's a little bit of evidence there, but not enough. I can't say, but what I can say, with some confidence, this effect is so broad for so many different diseases. I go lecture here, there, and every place, and I have people coming up saying, I had this, I had that, and they tell me about some new condition that I never, learned about in the literature. But I just find that idea so broad. In fact, my oldest son, who'll be lecturing tomorrow, Nelson, came up with the term, it's a fact of nature. Eating in a way is a fact of nature. It's that broad. So I'm going to say Hashimoto's disease ought to be affected by the plant-based diet. It should be good. Dr. Greger, by the way, a friend of mine, coming next, also a graduate of Cornell, by the way, I must tell you. So in any case, that guy, he got what's called nutritionfacts.org. He's a walking encyclopedia. So whatever I don't know, just ask him.
One more.
Right.
So that's something you would recommend?
Yeah, the question is whether we should advocate the consumption of B12, that supplement. I say yes. And again, Dr. Greger has better evidence on that. But it's quite clear that, there are cases where people have low B12 levels, they've got, physiological dysfunction, they take the B12 and it's better. So, but the whole story about B12, well, I say that story is yet to unfold. It's not just B12 coming in and getting absorbed and doing its business. It gets bound by a protein in the stomach. When that's deficient, it's called intrinsic factor. That kind of complicates the story a little bit in the answer. So things that disrupt that also can lead to B12-like deficiency. But in any case, B12 supplementation, yes.
Okay, well, that'd be the last question right there.
The USDA used to do nutrient compositions on the plants. I'm not aware that they're doing that research, and are you at all concerned that the nutrient composition of a plant-based diet in 2016 is a lot different than what it was in 1950 or so?
Sure, that's a good question. And there is some evidence of not the kind of evidence I'd like to see, but nonetheless, I think there's reasonably convincing evidence that the nutrient composition of plants these days on this soil is not quite what it was back in the 30s and 40s. There has been some decline in the nutrient composition, but from the data that I'm familiar with, I don't think it makes a heck of a lot of difference. There might be some attenuation of effect, which is a good effect by that notion. But actually, you know, the plants are so full of all kinds of nutrients, even though it's been depleted by 10, 20% or something like that, we're still, if you eat the right food, you'll get the right result. I wouldn't worry about that too much. But mind you, I'm just being honest, I'm telling you what I think we know and what I'm not sure we know. But I think just go to the store and just go to around the edge and take fruits, vegetables, and grains, stuff like that. Don't worry too much about that. Get organic. Here, we like to have organic. Because again, some evidence there is something helpful. We don't have really powerful, and the main thing to do is to eat the right food. That's the first order of business. Regardless whether it's 1930 or 1980. Just eat the right food.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Campbell.